All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Katie Kiersey, and I run marketing at Right Side Up. For those of you who aren't familiar with Right Side Up, we're a collective of growth marketing specialists who have helped more than 400 VC-backed tech companies hit their goals. We cover virtually all paid channels, SEO, CRO, email, analytics, and more, pretty much everything except for pure brand and PR. Today, we're going to be digging into why and how brands can incorporate LinkedIn ads into their ABM strategies. As you know, LinkedIn's a powerful channel because of its ability to create targeted campaigns that reach decision makers at the companies you want to do business with and deliver content that speaks directly to their pain points and their interests. And to take you through all of that, I'm pleased to introduce you to Trey Buchanan. Trey is a B2B advertising leader with experience managing LinkedIn ad campaigns for early stage startups all the way to Fortune 500 firms. He's managed more than $95 million in LinkedIn ad spend and was recently invited to serve on the customer advisory board for LinkedIn Marketing Solutions. Before joining Right% as the VP of B2B advertising, Trey was the head of B2B paid social at Metric Theory, where he managed a team of B2B focused social marketers who specialized in driving LinkedIn ad performance for their clients. He's got a lot of great material and insights to share with you today. But before I pass the mic to Trey, just want to cover a couple of quick logistics. First, if you have any questions, feel free to submit them throughout the session using Zoom's Q&A functionality at the bottom of your screen. Trey and I will address them as we see them, and we'll also save plenty of time at the end. And we will be pausing within each section to sort of give you a chance to gather your thoughts and submit those questions. And then second, I'll be recording the session and sharing it with all of you in the coming days, along with Trey's slides. And that is it from me. So Trey, I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Katie. Appreciate the introduction. And like Katie said, I want this to be kind of conversational. So I'm going to go through some good content here, and each section definitely want to hear from you guys in terms of what questions you might have and anything that's kind of top of mind for your business at the time. All right. With that being said, let me get my screen share rolling and we can hop directly into it. Katie, can I get a quick confirmation that you're able to see the screen?
Yes, looks perfect. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So this is just a quick agenda of what we're going to go over, just a quick introduction about me and Right%, how we kind of fit into the Right Side Up ecosystem. Section 2 is about why we do ABM with LinkedIn. 3 is going to be about effective ABM targeting methodologies for use on LinkedIn. Section 4, tactics that do and do not work on LinkedIn. So kind of give you some guidance about which things you should pursue and which things you should not pursue within the channel itself. 5 is how to measure success. And I bet that's probably where I'm going to get the majority of my questions today. So definitely interested to hear about that. And then 6 will be just general questions, and we can stop there for some either stuff that was in session or stuff that was top of mind, but essentially out of session. All right, with that being said, let's hop straight into it. Quick introduction to me and Right%. So like Katie discussed, been around the block for LinkedIn for a while, spent over 95 million on platform. Currently serving as a member of LinkedIn's customer advisory board, helping them pursue the product in a couple of different angles. Which has been great to kind of invest more into the product. That's kind of given me such a big impact on the B2B landscape. I've worked with a wide variety of startups, spend levels all the way down from 5,000 a month all the way up to 750,000 a month just on LinkedIn. So definitely use case wise can talk about specific spend levels, whether large or small. And then I've been featured in a couple of case studies on LinkedIn as well. What is Right% and how does it fit into the greater ecosystem? So Right% is a different arm of the Right Side Up organization. We focus specifically on just B2B paid media. So examples of that would be like search, Google, as well as paid social, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We pick some of the best marketers from the Right Side Up org and onboard them into a B2B team within the Right% team and assign them into sub teams. What we do is basically create a agency-based holistic approach, but with some of the best talent around. All right. So starting off in this, why ABM for LinkedIn? So just start off like, why would you want to do ABM in the first place? So when I see a brand doing LinkedIn or doing ABM, they do it for a couple specific reasons. The biggest reason is they want to get alignment within their sales and marketing orgs. They want to spend less time, getting to the right accounts and spend less money being more efficient. They want to focus on larger opportunities. That's sometimes the biggest one. I see clients come to us and say, hey, we want to go upstream and we want to target these specific accounts because we know they're a fit for us. That's typically where LinkedIn can be good for you. They want to increase their marketing ROI. They want to cut some of the fat that's within their current accounts and their marketing systems. They want to shorten sales cycles. ABM is effective in targeting specific individuals and accounts with specific use cases. And sometimes that can speed up the sales process. And then the final thing is enhancing customer experience. Sometimes what we see is that we see the same ad from the same advertiser over and over again. And it doesn't fit in terms of what we're actually looking for. That's a big disconnect that we're trying to avoid within ABM. And that's why we typically pursue ABM advertising. So why LinkedIn? Everyone on this call definitely knows it's the biggest professional network in the world, 750 million plus professionals on LinkedIn worldwide. You have the ability to target your ideal customers given pretty much their role, their company size, revenue, a bunch of different aspects that make it really, really powerful. And all that information is freely given by every person who makes a LinkedIn account. And then the third piece is hitting target lists where they are in a business mindset. So Facebook, if you're on Facebook, you might be looking on the marketplace, you might be looking at some funny cat videos, not necessarily the best business environment in the world. Pretty much everything that's shared on LinkedIn is business focused. So it's the proper mindset for someone to be in to look at a B2B ad in particular. In terms of audience capabilities, this is another big one. So within LinkedIn, you can do a couple of different things. The first thing being CSV uploads of target accounts and contact lists. So if you say, hey, I want to get in front of these target accounts, you can just do a CSV upload of that. All you need is domain and unique company name, and you can start pushing ads to those specific accounts. You can also do contact lists as well. So that'd be specific individuals on LinkedIn. Those lists are typically smaller, but also super impactful. If you want to get in front of, let's say you're an HR software company and you want to get in front of HR VPs at specific companies, above 500 employees. If you find that list of contacts and you want to pump them into LinkedIn, you can do so and directly advertise to those individuals. It also has a ton of integrations. So the ones that come to mind are different intent data platforms such as Bombora, G2 and Gartner also have integrations as well as a couple other firms. And then on the other integration side, you have ABM specific software. So that would be like your demand bases and your sixth senses. Sixth sense is a mixture of intent and ABM, but you can also integrate those audiences as well. And the beautiful thing about those integrations is that they're direct API connections. So you don't need to do manual uploads. Those lists are automatically updated as they're updated within the actual ABM software. So that definitely is super helpful there. Pretty much every company can do some form of ABM on LinkedIn. It's more just understanding what capabilities you have, what your technology stack is, and how it fits within your actual marketing goals and structure. When should you add LinkedIn ABM into the mix? Pretty much with every ABM movement, there's a couple of prerequisites for launching, and it's really dependent on what your goals are and what you're trying to achieve. The biggest thing is basically building on an account-based segmentation. Now that could be either through the sourcing of different lists for your target, your TAM, total available market. You could do that via the sales team saying, hey, these are the contacts in my region I want to get in front of, or certain verticals. You can build that out. And then once you build out those lists, you can do them into different segmentations. That could be via vertical. So for example, if you're running like a logistics firm, you could do a food and beverage list, you could do an oil and gas list, you could do a trucking list, you could split all of them out that way. You can also do that by intent. So you would need an intent data provider for this, theoretically through like a Sixth Sense or even a Bombora, but you could build out segmentations and lists based upon intent and upload them at those different stages. You do that via company size. So for example, we have some clients we work with that do mid-market and enterprise different sales teams. And so our segmentation in LinkedIn is built around that as well. In terms of the agreement on the sourcing, sales needs to work with marketing in order to agree on what is an appropriate account. And then as that list is built together, you need to be able to advertise to that. And if a lead comes in from that target account and sales DQs that, why did they DQ it? If it's a target account that they actually want to get in front of, there should be no reason that they're actually DQing it unless it's maybe the janitor at that company, just as an example. But you guys need to be really agreeing upon what is an appropriate lead, what's an appropriate contact, and an appropriate account to be pushing to. MAROP segmentation. This is something that's a little bit more complicated, but something I come across as a challenge quite a bit. Are you routing the leads to the right people? So for example, if someone comes in and they go to the wrong sales rep that's running that account, that's definitely a mismatch within your ABM structure, and you need to fix that. The other thing that we typically see as well is that sometimes if you have MQL structures, so if you have like a lead scoring and your lead scoring is too low, and it doesn't get pushed through, that could be a problem, because if you're doing a target account list, you want to push all that stuff to sales potentially. And so if you have Marop set up a segmentation that auto scores that to be an MQL and get sent to sales. That's going to be something you want to think about. And then do you have the appropriate content for your ABM targets? This is something that I think larger companies have invested more into and smaller companies could invest more in. And that's having content segmentation by vertical. So in my example of the logistics firm, you could do content that's based around food and bev's problems, trucking's problems, oil and gas's problems, and that'll help within the engagement of the actual ads themselves and the campaigns, but also just give a seamless integration all the way to the sales team that gives that better customer experience. Before I hop into effective targeting methodologies, any questions in the chat come up or anything anyone want to ask?
Not yet. We can give people maybe 10 seconds if they want to drop anything in so far.
Absolutely.
Anyone have any questions for Trey on why ABM? All right. Seems like folks are good for now. And as
Great.
we mentioned, we'll save time at the end too. So if anything comes up, we'll have more time then.
That's good. I'll pop through it. In terms of best practices, so within best practices, there's an appropriate amount of slicing and dicing that needs to happen for ABM. And it's depending on what segmentations you have available. You can try different tactics based on those segmentations and customize the experience to fit your audience's needs. So when I talk about like audiences, I'm thinking about sourcing from different integrations, including 6 Sense, Bombora, G2. You could push Marketo, you could push Salesforce, all these different options. Think about your entire MarTech stack and your overall stack, and think about what potential options you might have to push into LinkedIn. Now, you might not have some intent data that's widely available to you, like a Bombora that has a big license fee up front. But what you might have is you might be pulling in leads from like a G2 already, and you might have an agreement with them. But what you might not know is within that agreement, you can freely port audiences from G2 into LinkedIn. And so that's something to think about in terms of like what you want to do in terms of your available integrations. And then also your CRM is going to play a big piece into this as well. Some of them have easier integrations to work with. An example is like HubSpot is super easy to work with LinkedIn. It auto updates lists that are sent over. You can do this with inclusions and exclusions. Some of them are less automated. On the Marketo side, for example, recently they've been just trying to switch over to an automated push. What's happened with them is that they say, okay, well, you push this audience once, and then you have to manually keep updating it. Versus some of these other ones, they just automatically update like an Engagio, Demandbase, HubSpot, etc. So the big one that I love to work with for most of our ABM companies is going to be around vertical segmentation. So talked about the logistics firm already, but this is a great example for this. So break out your list by target verticals: food, bev, logistics, trucking, oil and gas. And then within those, build sub job title audiences within those. So if you have a sales team that's focused on oil and gas, I want to see a list of titles specific to that industry that we want to get in front of, because then we can start to customize who we want to see these ads. And then on top of that, we can build out a content strategy that is for that specific industry and job titles. And what that does is allows us to build that kind of custom flow all the way down to sales talking to them. But it's going to improve metrics across the board. It's going to improve click-through rate. It's going to improve conversion rate. And even with the improved click-through rate, you'll be able to bid less on them, and your CPMs will get cheaper. So it is a really efficient way to improve performance on the front end, as well as doing like a full funnel approach on the ABM side. And then ideally with the vertical segmentation, what we want is sales teams broken down by vertical. It can be region-based, and if the product is the same across all those functions, it's okay. But sometimes what we see is that sales teams that are focused on a specific industry do better, than having kind of a generalized sales team that's doing this sort of ABM approach on the vertical side. But this example one is my personal favorite to work with. Number 2 would be region and vertical segmentation. So we have the same example here of the logistics firm, but with different regions. So we have APAC, EMEA, and North America as kind of the 3 core ones. The reason why we think about breaking the segmentation out is a couple things. One is sales team differences. If you have a sales team that's across across an APAC and you need to feed them specific leads, that's important. Language matching is important. If you have a French company coming in, you want someone that's going to be speaking French, handling that in most cases. It's pretty straightforward. The thing that you might not think about as well is that within LinkedIn, if you combine them, what we find is that the cheapest region gets the majority of spend. each of these regions has specific CPMs that are going to be for them. So in just as a broad sweeping approach, North America is the most expensive. UK is second most expensive. EMEA is going to be third, and fourth is going to be APAC. And within APAC, there's some more expensive countries. Australia is a little bit more expensive versus like Malaysia, Singapore, any of those other regions. So within that, you'll want to split those up just because for campaign efficiency reasons, you'll be able to be more efficient with your spend and be able to appropriately put the spend where it needs to go by having this sort of segmentation. Within the content itself, it's also important to think about that by vertical and by region as well. If you have content that is language specific to each region, that's great. If you don't, I probably would hold off on that in most cases, unless you're going to be speaking English to most of the prospects coming in from those regions. What I've found is that if you deliver kind of a disjointed experience, like let's say you have theoretically a non-French specific piece of content, you have a non-French specific landing page and someone is speaking French that's disjointed, or frankly, the opposite could be true, right? If you have a French piece of content, French landing page, but someone in English is going to be calling them, that's just a poor experience. So try to align your content and your regional strategy with the language barriers as well there. In terms of the campaign segmentation, by splitting it out by region, you're also going to be increasing your overall campaign volume by 2 to 3x. So appropriate budgets are needed. I'll get to the budget section in a little bit, but something to think about would be, let's say you have 5 campaigns broken down by vertical. So you have 5 verticals. If you're going down into 3 regions, that's going to theoretically triple the amount of campaigns. It's going to put you at 15 per region or total. And so within that, you're going to need the appropriate amount of budget spend for LinkedIn to be able to optimize for each of those audiences. And a minimum is probably around the 4 to 5K mark per audience. So if we're talking a 15 campaign segmentation, we're looking at about a $75,000 per month ABM push. Now, if you don't want to go that route, you can focus on specific regions first. If you don't have that amount of budget, prove that strategy is correct, and then get more budget and then expand them out. But you don't need to do everything at once. And then example 3 would be like a 6 Sense intent breakdown. So the reason I bring up 6 Sense is that it's the most common ABM and intent data provider we come across. Because they do a ton across programmatic. They can work with sales teams in terms of outbound. You can look at, this sounds like a pitch for 6 Sense. I promise you it's not. But what we can do with this is we can export listen to LinkedIn by stage. So some of the example stages would be decision, purchase, and consideration. So what we would do is get a list sent for each one. And then what we can do is do a list of job titles that overlap each segment, and then do content that's varying by intent segmentation. So we could do like a demo or a free trial that's more bottom funnel. We could do content upper funnel, or you could do different content depending on each stage. What I would really think about is, yeah, it'd be nice to be able to take orders and do demo and free trial in the bottom. But what I see a lot of times is content is actually a great way to get in the door on the decision and purchase side. And frankly, sometimes better than the demo, because from there, hey, this person is already at this intent stage. They just submitted a lead. They're familiar with us now, and then sales can go and follow up with them, and that can help. And then the other thing would be if sales needs to be broken down by region or vertical as well. That's something to think about with the 6 Sense piece here. In terms of the segmentation, kind of similar to the region as well. If you have vertical and you have region on top of this, there's going to be a ton of campaigns. So you got to think about budget appropriately here as well, and might want to focus on one specific vertical or specific region in this case as well, if you have limited budget. So as I was talking about, ton of different options for segmentation. There is such thing as too much segmentation. There a lot of the audits I do for just general LinkedIn accounts, if they're spending 20K a month and I see that they have 10 campaigns, it's a big red flag that they're not getting enough data to make it work. That is going to be the same thing with ABM here. So the example on the bottom here, if you have 5 verticals in 3 regions with 20K a month, that's 1.5K around that per campaign per month. That's not enough to make this work, especially if your audience sizes are going to be in the couple 100,000 for some of those prospecting ABM campaigns. So general recommendation, start off with smaller, fewer campaigns, and then as you prove out the strategy, go wider and get more budget for it. I think I see one question in the chat, Katie, for this section.
Yes, exactly. So one of our attendees asked whether or not you need 6 Sense software for this, or can you just get the data? So like maybe other tools, or if there's other ways you've seen work in the past.
Totally. So the reason I bring up 6 Sense is just because it's the most common one I come across, because you can use it across the marketing and sales org. It's not necessarily the one I would say I recommend for every situation. You can do this with a combination of a ton of stuff. You could do some like, Zoom info polls of your target accounts. You could do, a combination of, your sales team building target accounts mixed with G2 integration data or Gartner intent data and different things like that are a little bit more cost effective. So there isn't like a one size fits all. You don't need 6 Sense to do this, but that's just an example segmentation, because I would be surprised if a couple people on this call are using 6 Sense at the moment.
Awesome. That's helpful. Hopefully that answered your question. Anybody else have any other questions on different ways to segment? Give it another 5 or 6 seconds. Cool. Okay. Looks like we're good to go for now, Trey.
Awesome. Let's do it. So in terms of ABM tactics that do and don't work. So everyone's aware of the one-to-one, one-to-few, and one-to-many thoughts on ABM. I'll go through each of those and if it fits within LinkedIn or not. The one-to-one piece. So when I say one-to-one, I'm talking like one-to-one from the account perspective. So one campaign for one account. Due to scale and automation limitations, I'd highly recommend against this. Most of the time it's because of just general audience size and segmentation. So if you think about like just a general like company that just exists in San Francisco with 200 employees and they're a target of yours, you want to build a custom campaign for them, most likely you're not going to be able to spend money on them. The reason being is LinkedIn can't target individual or companies that have less than 300 employees post filtering. So for an example, you don't want to target the entire company because you're going to be targeting different functions and job titles that don't make sense. You're going to want to add some job titles on top of that, or potentially job functions. Maybe that knocks it down from 200 employees down to 30 or 20 or whatever that is. You're not going to have enough of an audience to be able to push to that. So that's the biggest call out there. The other thing would be limited data aggregation. If you have let's say 100 campaigns set up and each campaign's targeting a specific account, you're just not going to have enough data within that to be able to optimize, because you're going to have limited availability for impressions. So I typically recommend against this. Plus the fact that it's going to be super unwieldy, right? If you have 100 accounts and 100 campaigns, like how do you manage that account effectively, even prior to thinking about the data aggregation issues? So I would just really recommend against doing a one-to-one approach. That being said, one-to-few is super ideal here. So this would be like the segmentation we talked about of industry or use case. If you have those build outs, definitely recommend using LinkedIn for it, because you can really just come up with a really customizable approach to how you want to bring people into your funnel. Definitely would recommend that. You do have a large enough data to work with in most cases. Let's say you have a list of 1,000 accounts and you have 4 different verticals. You have like 250 accounts. Like you can definitely work with that. That's something that's totally workable. You might have like 5,000 to 10,000 employees, maybe more, that you can target. That's totally enough to do it. It might take a longer time for you to build up that data aggregation and be able to make changes, but it's way easier and way more workable than one-to-one. Plus the campaign setup is going to be much more manageable for whoever's going to be managing that account for you. The third one is one-to-many. When I think of one-to-many, I think of just a standard target account approach. In my mind, just a broad target account approach is not ABM. It's not customized towards the individual specific needs or challenges. And so like you can do it. I have plenty of accounts that do, hey, this is all our list of target accounts. We want to focus on these, and they just push through. There's nothing wrong with that necessarily. It's just, is it true ABM if you're doing just a large target account approach? In my opinion, probably not, but you can definitely do it. The benefit to this would be theoretically, if you have enough data on the lead side, you could do some really interesting lead optimizations. Like if you had a audience of 500,000 people in your target account list after filters, you could start to optimize for actual lead events and goals. And that's pretty powerful, but it would be more powerful if you're able to segment and get better, click-through rates because you have better content or better ads for those different verticals or optimizations. There's a give and take there. It's something just to think about when you build out a strategy. In terms of content recommendations for these audiences, that is super dependent on where the target is in the funnel. as a just from my experience, I recommend testing all of your content across all the stages in the funnel and see what they respond to the best. Because what you'll find sometimes is whatever works in the top side of the funnel. So on the prospecting side for most people on this call in terms of they haven't been reached out to before. Sometimes that works really well bottom funnel, and you'd be really surprised. I've had companies that run a Gartner report, which people say is really high intent across all stages of the funnel, and it absolutely crushes. It's the best piece of content that they're running. So don't be afraid to try out stuff across the funnel. In terms of different third-party or different recommendations for content, third-party reports, if you're on the enterprise side, are typically the best things to do, mostly because it is someone talking positive about you and your company versus you talking positive about your own company. So it's really good to use. I know that there are licensing costs for this. So Gartner and Forrester do have licensing costs if you want to use like the Gartner Magic Quadrant as an example. But it's something I would highly recommend using and thinking about within your strategy. And then within that, if you are building content for your general company, I would say helpful and not boastful content is best. I think there's just a general saying in the marketing side that no one cares how much money you raised. I think that's true. You might have the next best product available, and it's really interesting from your perspective, and that's great. But if you're not building content that helps fix problems specifically for your actual ICP or individual customer, you're not going to be seen really well as a thought leader in the space versus someone who's just trying to say like, hey, look at this really nice shiny object we have. I recommend just building out content that's super helpful for your individual ICP, and they'll see you as a thought leader in the space and come to you, when they're ready to buy as a big leader within their sphere. Content to stay away from: infographics. I see a lot of companies and product teams making infographics saying like, look at this infographic to see how much money you can save by doing X. It's like, do you really want people to submit their email and phone number for an infographic? It's probably not going to happen. They typically perform the worst from a CPL perspective from pretty much every content piece that I've run. So I would highly recommend staying from that. Yeah, they do look pretty and they might make your company look good, but is it really helping your individual customer? Any questions on content or just some general strategies on one-to-one, one-to-few, one-to-many on the ABM side?
Ooh,
See one question.
One here. Let me just skim it. We've got a few. Okay, great. Let's go ahead and dig into this then. Daniel asks, are there any examples that you can speak to where ABM hasn't worked for a company you've worked with and why it didn't work? So outside of what you mentioned in the presentation, in other words, ABM targeted accounts are already being heavily prospected into by other channels such as paid marketing or outbound sales, or lack of context focus. So overly invested in demand gen, immediate bottom of funnel results.
That's a great question. So in most brands that I've seen ABM not work well, it's with what's called a blue ocean client. At least that's the term I've heard used. And what that would be is a client where pretty much every business needs a form of software or service for that business. So an example would be like QuickBooks, right? QuickBooks is used pretty much by every single small business in the world. And there's a bunch of different other variations as you go up in terms of company size that are really impactful. Every single company pretty much needs a form of financial tracking. And so like I've worked with a couple of brands that have blue ocean products that don't do well with ABM because they can just basically have a larger audience size and to use their use like algorithmic delivery, whether it's Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, to all optimize for a specific conversion event. And then ABM doesn't matter at that point because all you're trying to do is get as much efficiency as possible. And if you're overly efficient on that end, you're never going to need ABM because essentially like you're not going to decrease the cost per conversion. The other thing as well with the ABM side is with LinkedIn. This is more of a LinkedIn thing. It's also based upon cost. If you have a lower like AOV or just general lower pipeline value as a client, I typically don't recommend ABM or frankly LinkedIn in a lot of cases. And so I'll usually turn people away from that strategy and recommend a different channel for them. There's not necessarily like a value that I would think about as, hey, like you should stay away if you're at this value pipeline opportunity. But like LinkedIn's going to have expensive cost per click. So you're going to be paying $12, $15, $20, per click. And so if your pipeline value is like $1,000 or $2,000, might not be worth it unless your conversion rate is super high. You might want to think about using a different channel. Hopefully that answers your question, Danny.
Awesome. Thanks. I think there's a lot of good info in there, Trey.
Mhm.
Next up, we have a question from Bridget. How do you think about content distribution between free channels like your blog and paid channels like driving signups for an ebook on LinkedIn?
Sure. I like to think about LinkedIn as a premium content distribution channel versus some of the more organic stuff that I would not consider as much premium. So like if you build a I call them like Bible pieces of content, like really big guides. Like Salesforce does like a state of CRM report every year. That is something that I would consider a premium piece of content, and therefore like you would want to push that out and have an acquisition cost for that. And that could be just having it gated on site. That could be having it gated on different paid channels. Versus like blog posts, it kind of depends on the topic. If it's super timely, like I had some clients that ran COVID blog posts right when COVID hit about like how to manage your business and HR while during COVID. That stuff did gangbusters, but it was also lightning in the bottle. It was timely. It was on a big topic that was really pertinent at the time. And so like I typically stay away from blog content. There are opportunities to do ungated things. We are pushing towards other pieces of content within your website. That's all kind of dependent on your strategy of how you look at measurement and how you look at attribution. That's kind of a larger conversation, but that would also change my answer in terms of strategy between like content distribution for like free and how you impact that with paid.
Awesome. Thanks, Trey. That was great. Any other questions? We'll give it 5 seconds or so if anyone has something they want to share on the content side at the moment. All right. Charge on ahead there, Trey.
Let's do it. Measurement. Measurement is very complicated, and I'm not going to solve it today, but hopefully I can give you a couple of pointers and answers, or just even general directions as to where you should be heading within measurement. So one of the first things I typically recommend if you are more traditional and really want to see the impact on ABM is a classic holdout test. So for some advertisers that are newer, this strategy could be really, really important. So what we would do for this recommendation is split your audience 50-50. There is an AB testing tool within LinkedIn now, so you can split these audiences for this sort of test. What you would do is you would show 50% of your ads or 50% of the audience your ABM ads, and you would hold back on the other 50%. What you would do at that point is over the next 3 to 4 months, measure sales success of each segment. So on the 50% that is receiving, how are they performing? Are you seeing more volume of opportunities? Are you seeing conversion rate all the way to opportunity increase? What are those supporting metrics and how are they impacting your business versus the other 50%? What you might find is hey, I'm not seeing enough data that's giving me a good indication of that this is performing well. Probably there's a budget level where that's the case and you could actually spend more in order to get that data. There is also probably a segment where like, hey, my ads are bad and therefore the holdout test didn't tell me anything because the ads are performing poorly by themselves. We need to fix that first. So what I would recommend is like building out a cohesive strategy, content strategy, ad strategy that is specific to these audiences and like really hone in on that before going this route, because you don't want to have to do this again if you got the beginning pieces wrong of it. The other way to think about it is holistic ABM strategy performance. So this is what I was talking about with some of the ungated content. This is what the most sophisticated advertisers are doing, but it requires patience and it requires a leadership team that understands how to think about like non-direct attribution. And that's usually the sticking point. If the CEO wants to say, hey, what were the amount of opportunities LinkedIn drove this month? This probably isn't going to be the strategy for you. That being said, like what this is going to be doing is looking at overall pipeline from a combined impact of LinkedIn programmatic sales, outbound, etc. And then really the measurement is, are you hitting your pipeline and closed won goals? If you are, it's doing the right thing. And then if you wanted to measure the impact, what most people would do in these cases is change a piece of the strategy for a few months, understand what's happening. So as an example, if your email you think is doing super well, cut back on your emails by half and see if that actually impacts your strategy. Or, run this for a long time, cut your LinkedIn for a month, see what that happens in terms of acceleration metrics and all these different things to figure out which one is the most impactful for your business. That will allow you to double down in efforts that are going to be most impactful. And it might not be LinkedIn, but what you might find is that, hey, we're doing super well, and maybe programmatic is like not doing anything for us, and so we can reinvest that money somewhere else. This sort of strategy can't do that. Again, you need to have a ton of patience. You need to have a leadership team that really understands what's happening here. And then this is the one that we typically look at the most, is early indication of front-end metrics. So within this, we look at a couple of different things. Click-through rate is the earliest thing we look at. There's a biggest thing, the biggest thing we look at is 0.4% is the average click-through rate. So anything above that means that the audience is responding well to the ads. So that's kind of just my barometer. Is like, hey, are my ads performing well? Okay, well, click-through rate's good. Okay, therefore, like, we know that they're interested in responding well. Leads and CPL. So CPL is a hard metric to look at because it could be a number of things that are impacting it. It could be the number of fields on the form. It could be the offer that you're doing. Are you doing a direct demo versus a contact or a content lead? If you have a super easy form to fill and you're seeing less than like a 3% fill rate, you probably need to think about your ads and the offer. I actually did an audit for an advertiser today where the only thing they were asking for was email, and everything else was autofilled via LinkedIn lead gen forms. And their CPLs were above $1,000. That's a giant red flag to me. If your form is super easy to fill out and you can't get people to fill it, that should tell you something, that something's missing here or something's wrong. The other thing was take advantage of LinkedIn's audience visibility tools. So what LinkedIn does, and this is something that's been new for, I don't know, about a year and a half or so, is when you upload an audience, if you're actively pushing to it, you can see what accounts are actively engaging. So this is a segment pulled from an advertiser that I've anonymized. But essentially what it is it's showing how many, all the different accounts that they're engaging with from this list that was uploaded, as well as the number of campaigns they're in. The caveat to this right here is that this is the number of campaigns that they're in. That doesn't mean that they're actively pushing 43 campaigns to Walmart, as an example. It shows the amount of impressions to that account, engagement metrics, open organic engagement, website visits, and it also will show, I believe you can pull in leads as well by account. And then this is the engagement level. I believe the engagement level is impressions, is like a math number of impressions and number of members targeted. So like the less members you have targeted and the more impressions you have, the higher that they've been engaging. But this is a really cool tool that you automatically have within the account to be able to work with. Awesome. I see you have a lot of questions, so definitely hop in and answer some of these. First one from Quincy. Did you say there's ABM testing on LinkedIn when you mentioned the whole add-ons? Yes, there is. It might not be GA yet. It might be still in deep beta, but like it's coming and it's publicly known that this is a thing that is happening. So yeah, there is an option for that. I was in the beta test. I was in the alpha test a couple of years ago, but it should be coming to GA soon if it's not in GA yet. If the click-through rate is below 0.4%, do you think that's indicative of ad creative and copy, assuming that the target audience is narrowed down? Yes, assuming that you have the appropriate audience. And that's always the caveat for click-through rate, as well as like, do you know that the audience that you built is the correct one? If that is true, then yes, it's definitely creative and copy. And most likely it's creative. So if you think about a LinkedIn ad, right, there's three major pieces. There's the image itself, there's the headline right below it, and then there's the body copy right above the image. That image is going to be like 80% of the performance of that ad. The headline is going to be closer to 15%, and then less than 10% is going to be the body text. That is data from a heat map that I've seen LinkedIn show of like what people are looking at and engaging with on an ad. So the biggest thing would be try a ton of different ads to see which one performs the best. The other thing to think about is think about the content in the offer. If the content is not interesting, that's also going to really impact click-through rate negatively. So keep that in mind as well. And then the third question, if you do run the case where the form is mostly auto-filled leads, but CPL is over 1K, what do you suggest tackling first in terms of optimizing new content, different audience? Probably, I would take a look at the audience first and make sure that it's defined in the way that you want it to be defined. If you like it, content is going to be the big pull there. And then you can do some tweaks, like you can change some of your verbiage from passive to active. Instead of like, learn more about this content by going and doing this, it's, you could change it to download this piece of content to do X, Y, and Z. That can help, but mostly it's going to be like the right content mix for that audience first, and then how you like persuade them that that's what they want. Any other thoughts or questions on just general content or just indicative metrics before we hop into the next section?
I think we're good to go.
Sounds good. Budget recommendations. So I put 5.5 because I think this is just super important. So just want to make sure I do cover on this because I probably get a ton of questions on this after. Budget recommendations. So this is going to be really dependent on audience size and number of campaigns you're going to be running. If you, like I talked about earlier, if you have too small of a budget and too many campaigns, you're just not going to see an impact. General rule of thumb, every 200K to 300K people within a campaign, you want 7 to 15K per month. That is also true of prospecting or just general LinkedIn campaigns. So it would be the same for ABM. An example of this would be if you have 5 campaigns broken down by different verticals, the recommendation budget would be somewhere between 35 and 75K. Example 2, if you have 3 smaller campaigns with 20 to 50K people each, the recommended budget is going to be 15 to 30. And the reason why I make those recommendations is so you get some good data aggregation within that campaign, so you're able to make decisions. That's definitely a big piece. The other piece as well is that with the goal of every ABM campaign, you're still trying to penetrate enough accounts, enough of that audience to be able to make an impact. So if you have an audience size of 500K and you're spending $1,000 a month, you're not making really any sort of penetration into that overall audience. That's something to keep in mind there. But that's a general rule of thumb for audiences. Every audit I do is going to be slightly different, but if you take that as a general rule of thumb, you can kind of back into what your budget should appropriately be for an ABM strategy on LinkedIn. Now hopping into the overall Q&A, any questions on the budget though as well, happy to answer that. So feel free to hit us with your questions.
Awesome. Yes, this is great. Looking forward to seeing what other questions you guys have. Good information you've shared so far, Trey. While we let folks gather their thoughts, you've probably tailored the material to common questions you get or things you see in audits, but is there anything else that you didn't cover from an ABM standpoint that you'd recommend folks consider?
Oh, man. I think there's going to be a lot of people that have opportunities to use some intent data that they don't realize they have available to them. You know, a ton of people pull in leads from G2 or some of these other lead sources, lead aggregators, and a lot of those have direct piping APIs into LinkedIn for intent data. Now, it might not be the full suite of data. There's usually like different tiers, but there will be some that's going to be available to them. Even if it's people who visited your G2 page, like that's still super powerful and you should be able to take advantage of that with your current spend. So that's something I would think about. And then the other thing as well is that with the audiences, the job title piece is going to be extremely important. I think about it from 2 different aspects. There's the influencers and there's the decision makers. You want both in an ABM strategy, but you want to figure out where you want to cut off on the influencer side. We definitely don't typically recommend targeting entry level, but sometimes having a senior person, you know, below a manager that's going to be making that decision could be impactful for that decision. And so you do want to include them.
That's a great call out. Just taking notes on that here for the recap. Nice. Cool. I haven't seen any other questions come in. We'll give it another minute or so. If that always feels like an eternity when you're waiting for those last minute questions. But no, overall, this has been super insightful, Trey. Thanks so much for sharing all of your knowledge. Oh, we got one. Yay. Perfect. So I've heard another strategy to not use job title, but instead use seniority and job function. What are your thoughts on that, Trey?
Great question. So I use those 2, so job function plus seniority and job title as my 2 kind of core audience subsets, and it's dependent on the account. So if you have a super technical job title for your general ICP, job titles can be great. Job functions can be a little bit more broad. So let's say you wanted to target like engineers as a specific firm that do a certain thing. You might have an issue with the using like the engineer job function because you might be hitting engineers that don't even have any interest in your product or service. So it would really depend on the use case, but definitely would recommend testing both, assuming that there is an opportunity to do so. With the function side, what I would also recommend, and this is just a learning that popped up in my head, with a lot of HR software advertisers we work with, what we found was LinkedIn was putting recruiter titles in the HR function bucket, and they didn't want those. So what we had to do was do the HR function, but actively exclude the recruiter titles to make sure that that audience was cleaned up a little bit. So it's a case-by-case basis, but you could definitely try both.
Awesome. Thanks. That's great. And then Quincy asks, in decisions, so one-to-one, have you seen any success driving meetings or demos specifically for SaaS?
Quincy, do you mind kind of clarifying that? I'm just need a little bit more, I think, to help answer that question.
I'll give him a sec. Haven't seen it come through yet. There we go. Is LinkedIn
the right platform?
Yeah, you got it.
Yes. So there's a couple ways to think about it. It would kind of depend on like specifically on like the decision stage. There is a point of no return where sometimes in the intent side, if people are already so far in like the intent stage decision or purchase with another product or team, that like you're not going to be able to pull them off of that piece of software or off that team. So there is like sometimes what we see is decision and purchase. You might want to, maybe back out to not doing purchase, but doing decision only, just because like there is a timing issue. But definitely, yeah, I've seen meetings booked from that. What you would want to do in that sort of scenario is break out the segments by like intent stage. And then at the campaign level, what you can do is look at internally on like, hey, here's how many opportunities were driven by each stage. Here's how many meetings were booked by stage. But yeah, absolutely, definitely seen meetings and overall demos driven by the decision stage.
Thank you. Okay, anything else that's on your guys' mind about LinkedIn for ABM? All right, Trey, well, like I said, thank you so much for your time and for putting together these wonderful materials. I hope everybody found them as insightful as I did. As we mentioned earlier on, we have recorded this session, and I'll be sharing the recording as well as Trey's slides with everybody in the coming days. So keep an eye out for an email from me. And yeah, that's it for today. Thanks so much again, and hope to see you all soon.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.